Australian government and the blockchain. What is the Australian government up to with the blockchain? In this video, I'm going to quickly go over what the blockchain is, and then run through 3 or 4 examples of what the Australian government is doing with the blockchain. I'm Matt Grace, Managing Director of Flying Donkey. Let's get into it. What is a blockchain? It's difficult to exactly define what a blockchain is, as a number of people have different ideas on what it does. I'll try and explain it in the best way I can, try and help you know what a blockchain is. First thing to be key about a blockchain is it must be distributed, and it's going to store a list of ever-growing transactions in a chain-like manner. Each of these chain elements are going to be made up of blocks, and inside these blocks is where the data is actually stored. Adding a block to this chain must go through one of the distributed nodes. This distributed node will use cryptography to encrypt this block before adding it to the chain. To try and summarize, essentially, blockchain is a distributed data store that is publicly accessible by anyone, but can't be tampered with by anyone. Because if someone tries to change one of the blocks, then someone will know the chain is broken, and therefore they've tampered with it. And this essentially means that no third party controls this data, it's publicly available to see by everyone, and is essentially self-controlling. And this is why both people and governments are interested in this technology and using it for a variety of use cases. It's worth noting that both public and private blockchains are available, and I'll quickly touch on both of those. Public blockchains are probably the ones you've heard of, such as Bitcoin, where any node in the public can join and actually add blocks to the chain. This is essentially what blockchain was made for, to allow anyone outside to look at the blockchain, verify the transactions on the blockchain, and add nodes to the blockchain as long as it's agreed upon by a mechanism. Now, the second thing that you can actually do is you can run private blockchains internally within a company. Now, while this is not what the blockchain technology was intended to do, because obviously here you've got a third party controlling the chain, it is possible in some scenarios to run this technology. Essentially, you're going to be using blockchain as a better distributed data store, and therefore you control all the nodes for the chain. Obviously, this carries the same risk that anything does currently, where if a single person has control over the entire data store, they obviously can manipulate it to their advantage. What are the benefits of using the blockchain? The government's published a number of papers around what they're trying to achieve out of blockchain, but a few points I'll touch on here are as follows. Generally speaking, the Australian government wants to be seen to be keeping up with technology advancements, and blockchain is one of those key things that has taken the world by storm. Blockchain does allow distributed data to be shared easily, as well as a secure way of doing this, and this potentially does have a lot of use cases if it is implemented correctly. Whether this actually functions in the end is yet to be seen, but it's a key thing to know that such technologies need to be investigated first to understand exactly how they work and how they can be used before they can roll out projects. This is exactly what the government's doing. What are the arguments against blockchain? I've previously posted a video on my thoughts on where Bitcoin is the one use for blockchain, and while that may or may not end up being true, there are a few negatives to know about blockchain overall. The 2 key ones I want to touch on here is the immutability of the blockchain. This is one of its pros, but also one of its cons. And what that means is the blockchain cannot have any edits. Now, while this sounds good in principle, there is a lot of practical issues that this causes. Because a block, once it's in the chain, cannot be changed because the whole chain loses its validity, it means that if someone makes a mistake, that can't be edited. Now, in real world use, humans make mistakes, and so therefore this is a significant problem for the blockchain. The other one I want to touch on is the energy usage for the blockchain. Now, because there's a huge amount of proof of work required in order to submit to a blockchain, and if proof of work is put in place to make sure that all nodes are accurate and not being bad actors, it does have a place in the blockchain, but it does cause a huge amount of additional work that is not normally required. Let's take a quick example. If you want to submit a record to a database, you simply submit an insert or an update statement to that database, and you're done. You have already authorized your username and password or some other connection string details. Whereas in blockchain, you need to actually do a proof of work before you can submit this to the blockchain. This can become a significant overhead, both to time and to power. We're starting to see this play out with Bitcoin, where transactions are starting to take a long time to process. With all that in mind, let's take a quick look at what the Australian government's trying to use the blockchain for. The National Blockchain Land Registry. Simply put here, what they're trying to do is put the land registry into a blockchain. Therefore, it'll be publicly available and easily able to transact on. The outcome here is pretty easy to see. What they want to do is the movement and transfer of titles to be far easier and transparent. Currently, it's a bit of a convoluted system, though it has recently been fixed with the introduction of PEXA. Whether blockchain can fix this or not is still to be seen, and a wait-and-see approach is probably best to be prudent here. A central bank digital currency. This one can get pretty complex pretty quickly, but essentially due to the popularity of Bitcoin and all the other coins that it spawned, the central bank is investigating whether issuing its own coin is something that it wants to do. It's planning to do this on the Ethereum network, and is also looking really around as delivery versus payment to make sure that there's confidence in the currency around delivery versus payment. Again, this is still a proof of concept and they're still working through this because obviously governments are worried that the fiat currency they have may be overtaken in the future by digital currencies. And they want to be in the race to know that if this is happening, that they have the knowledge to try and jump and move on this going forward. Smart trademarks. This one is a little bit more advanced and is actually in production readiness right now. The government has partnered with the NRL and some community groups to run this out in a production trial. Again, so we put here, we've got trademarks, which are digital assets. We're trying to put these onto a data store, which is the blockchain. This plans to make the use of trademarks a much simpler process. It also plans to open this trademarks up to the public to show them that here is the public blockchain, and when you submit, add, edit, or delete a trademark, it's on the public blockchain that you can see and action for yourself. Again, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in production, because obviously the trademarks do have a platform they already use with traditional technology that does allow these functions to exist. The final example I'll bring up here is cross-agency and cross-intelligence sharing. We obviously have a lot of partnerships with things like the US and the UN, and sharing intelligence between these organizations is critical. My guess in this situation is they're going to be using a private blockchain where they're trying to digitize all this intelligence and allow it to be easily shared between all the organizations. If you're playing in the government space, and it's particularly in the intelligence area, it's probably something to keep your eye on to make sure that if this comes to fruition, that you're heavily involved in the blockchain technology going forward. In summary, the government is looking to a huge amount of ways to both leverage the private and public blockchain, and my overall view is a bit of a wait and see approach. The key thing is though, it's always good to try and drive change. And as I mentioned in one of my earlier videos, and while the blockchain really hasn't become a tool that's used in every business, it is possible in the future that it will be. At the same time, it's done a real job at innovating change. And while the government is trying in these areas, it may not be blockchain that comes to be the answer, there may be some other answer that's actually happening. And obviously when you're looking for change, change will potentially happen, and that's always good for improvement overall. I wish the government the best on their blockchain journey. And if you're interested in the blockchain or how it can potentially help your project, here at Flying Donkey, we're happy to have a chat and see how it can help you.